Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe so you won't miss a new episode. I'm your host Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted and privileged to have a conversation with Jimmy Nelson. Jimmy, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Good morning.
Jimmy, we are in your studio. You are a photographer, and
well, what was left of it today? We're in a.
You are moving.
We're
yes.
moving, so we had to sort of build this little section in the corner. Because if you look this way, which we won't, There's 1,000 boxes. But
it's
we're
lovely.
in what was my studio, and on Monday I'm moving to a new space.
Okay. Hey, I'm glad and honored to have you in our program.
Thank you very much.
And we're going to talk about your life as a photographer. First, easy question.
Great. I like easy questions.
When did you start as a photographer?
Where to begin? I'm going to be 56 this year.
Yeah.
I was born in 1967 in November. I'd been traveling the whole of my life. Mm-hmm. So for the last almost 56 years, I was born traveling. My father was a geologist.
Okay.
He'd lived in his early 20s, he worked in the Antarctic as a geophysicist doing research. He also had a camera. The first camera I began with was his camera, for those nerds who are listening, a Zenit B. And I was given that when I was 16. Prior to the age of 16, I traveled extensively around the world, had lived with my parents on most continents, except for the North and the South, Arctic and Antarctic, unlike my father. And at the age of 17, I ran away. I was, in English you say, not a happy bunny, a very, very, very uncomfortable teenager with myself, with everybody and with the world. And I disappeared to punish everybody around me and also perhaps to punish myself. We can perhaps get into that in a little minute. And I disappeared off to Tibet in 1984. So I was 17 when I finished my high school. And I ran away. And I took my father's Zenit B with me. I had 4 rolls of Kodacolor gold. For those of you who are listening, who know what that is. They're in little tubes and you wind them on in the camera.
The analog days.
That's when I began, So a long, long time ago. Now I'm all grey, as you can see.
Okay, a little bit older. But was Tibet a coincidence?
In hindsight, no. But at the time, perhaps yes. Let's go into hindsight. Hindsight is the sort of the reflection of acquired wisdom. I ran away to a part of the world where I wanted to re-identify with myself and others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand.
I was inspired to go to Tibet. I'd never been there before by Tintin. In Dutch we call him Kuifje. Yeah. Tintin and Snowy and Captain Haddock. And the reason I was inspired by Tintin was that I lived for 10 years in a Catholic Jesuit boarding school, 400 priests and 1,000 little boys. It didn't go very well because, if you can imagine, 1% of the 400 priests wearing a cassock for the last 40 years, living in an institution behind a wall with lots of little boys wearing shorts. A few of them going to go the wrong direction. They took me in that wrong direction. So I was kind of sort of, in Dutch you say, gemarteld, destroyed as a kid. Yeah. As a result of that sort of destruction, my hair fell out when I was a teenager, when I was 16. So I woke up one morning and looked in the mirror and sort of met another face. I found it quite confrontational. As I described, I wasn't a happy bunny. I'd decided to loathe myself, although it was a secret because of what the priests had done to me. But the day I woke up with no hair, everybody said, "You're ugly." And I said, well, I've felt ugly since I was 8 years old. And I thought, where in the world would there be people who look like me? And I remember going back to Tintin. Tintin was my avatar. So when these priests used to come in late at night and do these dreadful things with us, I would close my eyes and travel with Tintin. And because I was a traveler myself. And I thought, well, Tintin went to a place in the world where all the little children had no hair, the monks in Tibet. So in 1984, I bought a one-way ticket to China, and I disappeared off and I crawled into Tibet. And I was one of the first Westerners to revisit Tibet since the Chinese had sort of gone in and taken it over. So I was looking for other human beings to empathize with and perhaps have compassion for, and vice versa. if that makes sense.
I fully understand that.
This is in hindsight, but as a teenager I had no idea what I was doing. But as you look at it, because it was a very radical decision, and I was there for almost 3 years, there must have been a sort of a raison d'être, and in hindsight it must have been this. I was looking for others.
Okay, what you're alluding to in what you shared with us is quite shocking, which something you would not wish on anybody.
Yeah, it's shocking. I think it's we all experience things.
Yeah.
We're all covered in scars in a variety of colours and form. And I think in that particular culture, in that particular time, it was quite prevalent. I will often make jokes that I enjoy living in the Netherlands. I've lived here for 30 years. I call myself Dutch because in the Netherlands we don't have curtains. And when things are uncomfortable and difficult, we tend to talk with each other about it. We're often seen as being very rude and direct, but we're just dealing with the truth. When I grew up as a child, when things were uncomfortable, when things went bump at night, they tended to close the curtains, have cups of tea and talk about the weather. And so it was quite prevalent, but it was hidden. Yeah. And the result being you wake up one day and you realize you're in pain in a variety of forms. My blessing in disguise was that my pain was outed by my appearance, losing my hair. Everybody said, you're different. Well, I'd always felt different. In hindsight, I realized I'm actually very different. I'm sort of quite as heavy on the autistic spectrum, very ADHD, very creative, very visual, very three-dimensional, very androgynous. So all these things as a kid. I learn in a different way. I'm very autodidactist. I like to learn by doing and failing as opposed to being told. So this was a sort of Molotov cocktail of a concussion plus my appearance, which was the catalyst for me to begin again, which I think is the way I see it now in hindsight. So I was actually very blessed. You turned something
very negative.
Religious.
Something very negative in a positive.
Yeah, but unconsciously as a child. But it was this sort of desperate. I'd touched on something as a child, and we'll get into this later in the conversation, that was outrageously beautiful, the world and humanity that lives in it. And we are now more than ever indoctrinated to the ugliness of human beings. But I believe inherently we're all good, and there is an extraordinary beauty still here to be had in kind and in place. And I touched that as a child. And I can remember being blissfully happy. I lived with all these communities in all these different parts of the world without speaking the language. And I was accepted and seen and metaphorically loved for being Jimmy, not for how I looked or the colour of my skin or what I did or didn't speak or what I could or couldn't do. And I remember instinctively, I've got to get back to that place of safety, that place of happiness. It may take me 30 years.
Now, so, because I want to come back to what you said. You nicked your father's camera, a couple of film rolls.
No, he actually gave it to me. He gave me his camera, I stole his credit card.
Okay, maybe an even better deal. So because you're talking about how beautiful the world is. Does this is that your photography, because as far as I can tell, you like to take photos of people.
Yeah, and we should take it a stage further. You kindly introduced me at the beginning as being a photographer and then being a successful photographer. Success, that's also something else we can discuss in a minute. I'm still here. That's perhaps a success, despite certain circumstances. Photographer, I don't necessarily see myself as a photographer. I'm obsessed with photography.
Okay.
But I would argue today there are about 4 billion photographers on the planet. So it's not a very unique trade or profession. It's a skill. It's not even a skill nowadays. 50% of the world can take a half-decent picture. I hope I'm one of them. But I use a camera, and I've taken it a stage further. I've gone back to analog. I've created myself very large 10x8 negative analog cameras. The camera is the medium to tell the story. So I now have managed to get my sort of small head around the story that I'm trying to tell and share, and will be for the forthcoming future.
Okay, sure.
And one of the mediums I use obsessively is a camera.
Okay, so your brand is a visual storyteller rather than a photographer.
I would say a visual storyteller, an individual who through unusual circumstances is trying to realign himself, using a contemporary term, with his healthy sustainability to make sure that the forthcoming years, days, months, weeks, decades that he's given, whatever they are used to create the most extraordinary legacy.
Okay. Does that mean your work is autobiographical?
Totally, yeah. And it's also therapy.
For you.
If I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah, no,
and I think that's been the most transparent and most truthful. And as we have no curtains and we're in the Netherlands, we're telling the truth. It's
you're saying whatever you want.
Very much therapy. Yeah.
So you're there, you're taking pictures as a form of therapy. At a certain point, probably, I'm just making that assumption, somebody notices your pictures. Did you share these pictures to somebody? So now you got these great pictures on the wall, you have great books which people can buy.
Thank you.
So how...
The bridge, it was an interesting bridge. I was running away with a camera when I was younger, in my early 20s. I photographed a lot of turmoil and trauma, so essentially we call it war. It wasn't a healthy pastime. I was also hiding in the pain of others to disconnect from my pain. I met my then wife when I divorced when I was 24. We got married. She said, you've got two options. You carry on doing this, you won't be here much longer, or you can start a family with me. I moved to the Netherlands. I started doing commercial photography. That was to pay in Dutch we say the gas en licht, the gas and the electricity. It never made me happy. I'm not a sort of numerically minded individual. I'm very much more about sort of sharing and giving. And I hit a point where I became, in Dutch you say murf, numb. I didn't enjoy what I was doing. So I went back to the source of what I did when I was younger, using a camera as a medium to connect in the richest way possible with another human being. So I carried on doing that. I collated a number of journeys, stories and pictures. A few people said, well, you know, there's something to be said in this. I visited every publisher on the planet and they all rejected me. And it was just quite amusing at the time. It was about 15 years ago. And they said, well, we're going to Google you. So they sort of went online to Google for Jimmy Nelson. And Jimmy Nelson existed, but he didn't. They all had hair. There were three other Jimmy Nelsons. And I say this mockingly, but also lovingly for the sake of the story. One is a Canadian baseball player, one is a ventriloquist, and one is a fisherman in Miami who's now on Instagram with about 5 million followers because he has lots of girls with bikinis behind them. They're all Jimmy Nelson. So every one of these publishers said, we can't find you. You're not online, so you must be nobody, quote. And so, well, I'm standing in front of you. And they're saying, yeah, but you're not online, so you're not valid. So that's how it began. So one massive rejection. And pictures and stories of indigenous cultures, well, that's the past. This doesn't count anymore. It's not relevant. Nobody will be interested in it. So we're not interested in publishing any books. So that's how it began 15 years ago. By serendipity, by a whole other story which will take half an hour to tell, which I'm not going to indulge. One publisher said, we'll take a gamble and we'll make two as a test run because you've tried so hard. And as a result of that, the project started. The book went viral, and we're sitting here today. So it was, now there are 4 Jimmy Nelsons online. And I still don't have 5 million Instagram followers because there's nobody standing in bikinis behind me.
Okay. Now, your first project, the book, what's the title of the book, by the way? Before They Pass Away. Before They Pass Away.
First project, it was an accumulation of thousands of journeys and images, but it was the first book that was published. So it wasn't specifically begun as a project. The project started when I was a child. But the first title was Before They Pass Away.
Okay, so if people buy the book and look at the pictures, do they would the pictures you took as a child still be in the book?
The pictures that are in Before They Pass Away, the first pictures were taken in 1990. So it's accumulation, 1990 up until 2013. But the early pictures of my early childhood, no, they're still yet to be published.
Now, for the people who are not familiar with that book, can you take us a little bit along what that book is about?
The book is about, it's the simplest way to describe it, it's an overindulgent, romantic celebration of a selection, of a kaleidoscope of some of the world's last indigenous cultures. They are presented in a way which we are not traditionally used to seeing. I think in the developed world, when we present ourselves in front or behind the camera, more often than not, we put ourselves in a celebratory light, a directed light, a respectful light, a beautiful light, but may not necessarily be the truth of the moment. Indigenous cultures had always been documented in a rather patronizing way, as if they were less or than we were in the developed world. And I, by default, it wasn't necessarily preconceived, inverted that and put them on a pedestal. So I shone as much light of dignity, respect, and beauty on them as we shine on ourselves. As a result of that, so a very directed, a very respectful, a very glorious, a very celebrated way of looking at them. As if they had something else to show us other than their sort of simple ethnicity. As a result of that, there was quite a sort of a viral conversation that ensued as to whether this was right or wrong.
Okay.
And an element of notoriety, which strangely in life, when all discussion is valid, and some of it was negative discussion, but because of the negative discussion, the project was propelled into the world.
Yeah, because question I had, the title for me is a little bit ambiguous.
It's meant to be.
It's meant to be, good. So maybe you can clarify the ambiguity. What's the real story you want to tell? Is that, guys, this is the last rhino, have a look before they're not there anymore? Or
the authenticity, before homogenization is setting in.
Yeah.
Before we all become one and we completely disconnect from our cultural and ancestral heritage, I want to put into a spotlight the few individuals on the planet who still hold on to it. So that is passing away. They are not dying as individuals, but the wealth of that human heritage is. And we need that to move healthily into the future. And we can get into this in a minute.
Good. So do I hear you correctly say I want to do my bit to help preserve?
I'm not preserving anything.
No, you're just documenting.
I'm not preserving anything. I'm sharing in an artistic way my perception of what I've experienced and see and how valid I believe it is to the world. But I'm not preserving anything because they are continually evolving and changing as we are. 50% of the people I've met and photographed over the years now are also online. They're aware of how the rest of the world looks, acts, thinks, eats, dreams, whatever. But what I'm trying to encourage is this realignment, this rebalance for them and for us, that then your heritage is valuable, don't discard it as we've discarded ours. And for us, the wealth and the wisdom that they have as human beings living connected with themselves, each other, culture, and the natural world is paramount for our healthily progression into the future. If we rely on pure technology to solve all our, excuse my Dutch, shit, it's over.
So that's your story.
So technology is outrageous. We're sitting here with the smallest, eeniest, peeniest cameras that ever existed in our story. This conversation will go around the world. But that's not the answer to everything. We have to keep it human. And the people I meet, photograph, present, talk about, and exhibit are the antithesis of people in living in a balanced way with themselves in the natural world. We're not.
We're not.
In my opinion. But this is
okay,
very
your opinion as a
unscientific,
Western,
it's just my opinion.
Okay, no, or your observation, because you have met all these people.
And also just to remind you and the audience, I haven't been to school since I was 17, so none of this has any scientific basis. It's purely what I've soaked in over the years of my experience.
Well, life experience. A couple of questions. This triggers me a couple of questions. Because if I remember correctly, most people who would photograph people, they would just come in for a moment, take the photo, and go away. But you actually came back to them. You went back with the book.
It's not only going back with the book; it's the whole process of making the photograph in the first place.
Yes.
Let's take it a stage back. I often get, as I've just said, somewhat facetiously, there are 4 billion photographers on the planet, which there are. Most of them are very disappointed with the pictures that they make because they walk into a situation and they use a term which I was taught by a group of children. They spray and pray. And they expect something profound to be recorded without actually investing in the... I do the opposite. I will spend anything up to months, and sometimes I still don't make a picture until the meeting is consolidated. So a small sort of side story along these lines. I was giving a presentation to a pile of kids not so long ago, and they were very cheeky, and they were 16, and they were looking at this sort of middle-aged guy talking about his big old analog camera and the fulfillment that it gave him. And they said, "We don't get you. Are you that old you don't realize how easy life has now become because of technology?" And I was going, well, what do you mean easy? And one of them held up his iPhone and said, well, you don't have to spend months somewhere. You just sort of stick your telephone up in the air and put your finger on the button and you can spray and pray. And I sort of looked at him and said, yeah, but I don't want to spray and pray. I want this sort of intimate meeting. And they would look very confused. And I realized if I'd carried on talking about sort of analog and digital photography, I would have lost them. So I organically made a segue. And I said, okay, this is about feeling. It's about emotion. You want to feel something.
Yeah.
And they all immediately denied they wanted to feel anything because they were 16. And one of the kids, and I started teasing him, there's something you want to feel, I know there is.
Yeah.
So his friends started sort of whispering to him. And he sort of went all a bit red. He said, yeah, I suppose there is. And I said, well, share it with the audience. Yeah, there's a girl I want to kiss. And I said, okay, let's talk about kissing. So all of a sudden the room goes quiet. Everybody actually becomes quite interested. We stop talking about stupid photography. Let's talk about dating. I said, well, I'm not that experienced, but I think you are more than I am. But I'm going to give you 2 chances for a kiss. And using the metaphor of the picture. The first option for the kiss is your wish. It's your spray and pray option. So let's say tomorrow morning you can go down to the school square and everybody's standing there and you have to make no investment whatsoever. You don't have to choose, you don't have to ask, you don't have to flirt. You just put your arms out and you can kiss and be kissed by everybody. Yeah. That's option 1. So all the kids sort of going, option 1, option 1, option 1. I said, okay, well, option 2 is something else. It's about 1 kiss. Unfortunately, it's not guaranteed. It may not happen, but let's say for the sake of argument today, it is guaranteed. It's 1 kiss. You're allowed to have it. It'll last 1 second. At the end of the last minute, last hour of the last day of the last week, after 3 months waiting, which would you choose? One that's not guaranteed and 1 after 3 months, or 1,000 tomorrow morning? So unanimously, option 1. They looked at me in silence and I said option 2 and they looked confused and they said, why? And I said, because it's not about the kiss anymore.
It's the anticipation.
It's the process. It's the journey. It's the search. It's the romance. It's the seduction. It's the failure. It's the scars. It's the pain. It's the tears. Yeah. And when I go on a journey and I take my big old camera with me and I take 10 sheets of film, I dig very, 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 very deeply to make that meeting before I expose the film. And to do that, you crawl and have others crawl under your skin in the meeting of 2 minds. And that's what it's about.
Jimmy, is this also just plain trust that
you have to build it?
You have to
build it. Yeah. But traditionally speaking, when we, let's say for the sake of travelers, we disappear somewhere, we believe coming from the developed world we're superior. We look down on the subject with a long lens and we spray and pray. We don't even look at the subject anymore. We look in the back of the camera and we delete and delete and delete. Invariably, I will go somewhere and I will invert that hierarchy. I will get very low. Yeah. I will look up, and from a very low perspective, I'll start to worship, to talk, to communicate, to admire, to adore.
Okay.
And in that way, you make a different communication.
And can the observer, the people who see your pictures, can they recognize, can they notice when someone or you in this case has invested the time to build up the trust?
I can't. People here or in the developed world, developing world.
No, in the pictures you take, you say I'm taking the time to understand these people.
Well, 99% of the people I make the pictures of are not interested in photography or pictures. Yeah. They're interested in the human meeting. Yeah. Even when I go back with the work and say this is what I took for you, they're still not interested in it. They're very interested in me and the effort that I made to come back. But they're not as busy as we are with the aesthetic of how we look.
Understand
they're
that.
Busy with how they feel.
I'm trying to figure out, so building that trust, forming that relationship has
a total submission and vulnerability.
A question, because we talked a little bit about these pictures being autobiography. Is this something you want to do for yourself, or is this something you do because you realize is going to give you better pictures?
It's not so much the pictures, it has to do with the more investment I make into the aesthetic of the image, the more profound and rich the meeting will become.
Okay.
So if I turn up with a smartphone, I go click, 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 I'll make a picture, but there's no emotional investment prior to that. If I go with a very large 10 by 8 analog camera with 1 sheet, I may have to spend 3 months. In that 3 months, I get far closer. I have a far better understanding of who's in front of me, the environment that we live in, how they live, what they have to show, what they have to teach. And the picture at the end isn't necessarily a better picture, it's a much richer picture, it's a much layered picture, there's many more ingredients, and to it, whether it's better or worse. That's not what it's about. But the meeting and the wealth of the information I leave with is extraordinary.
It's a richer story.
It's a much richer story, much richer content, and as a result of that, that's what I try and share by the pictures, the books, the stories, the exhibitions, the films that I'm making, the wealth of the content. It does help if the images are of an aesthetic standard and also in a directed way where there's a visual signature on them that they're made by me, because then the conversation is consolidated that was started 30 years ago, this discussion of direction, of aesthetic, of light, of subjectivity from my perspective as an artist. So it does help that the pictures are aesthetic, because I'm trying to cause a conversation. And I'm trying to gain an audience of interest to look beyond the picture and inquire what they see and why it attracts them.
Okay. I want to come back a little bit different topic in this case. How indigenous people, that's the people you follow. How do you make a decision? How do you reach out to them? How do you make a selection? Have you made a selection, or was it just at random?
Nothing is random, but a lot of it is organic. I'm starting a project at the moment called, the working title is The Hidden Kingdoms. So it's essentially the Middle East, but it will not have any religious connotations, but it's all the countries across the equator, starting from West Africa up until Pakistan, up to the Stans, that, in my opinion, have not been aesthetically, respectfully, artistically documented in the last 30 years because of global politics. So that is a specific subject. The majority of the countries which I can safely get access to, I will go. The ones that I can't, I'm afraid I have to park until a date that is safe. So that is a preconceived idea. So that, and then in that process, I communicate about what I'm doing. There is an element of a momentum to my aesthetic and my art. So I'm now getting a number of invitations, although I have to be careful to keep those invitations at arm's length because I want to remain independent and objective for my own subjectivity. So it becomes a sort of a spider's web of contacts, of information, but there is a preconceived project. And I did a project in the Netherlands during the pandemic called Between the Sea and the Sky. That was a preconceived project with an overview. Before the pandemic, homage to humanity. That was
actually so. That was a project which would that project have existed if there wasn't a Corona pandemic?
No. It was a wonderful project. Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, the beginning of the pandemic, we all went, "Oh no, there are problems." Well, we know about those anyway. And I had resolved a number of personal issues. So I was, even though the rest of the world, the sun had gone into a sort of almost semi-permanent eclipse. For me, the sun was shining. And I'd received an email a number of years prior to the pandemic saying you have to come and see us here in the Netherlands. And I was going, well, I'm too busy with Verwegistan. And then I realized I wasn't going to Verwegistan in the near future. So I answered that email and off I went into the Dutch landscape on my bicycle. And I had the most wonderful weirdly wonderful 1.5 years in the Netherlands, discovering the country which I had adopted me 30 years ago, but never really making any investment to discover who lived here and what my context was here. And I often describe Between the Sea and the Sky as a gift to the nation that sort of saved me. Is a bit melodramatic, but I'm actually very happy here. I quite like, at least pretending to be Dutch. And it's my gift to a country that's given me an awful lot of love. And weirdly, it has very much the similar signature to everything else I do. So it also doesn't validate, but it does consolidate the journey that I'm on. It's an artistic journey. It's not an anthropological journey. And whether I'm here, there, or anywhere, I look at the world in a very specific way, and I look at the people in it in a very specific way, and that's in a beautiful way.
I have to ask you, as a segue, to the fact that that series has actually been turned into a series of stamps you can now buy. How did that happen? Did somebody approach you?
How did that happen? It was a colleague of mine. I work with 6 very, 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 very clever ladies, and they essentially managed this whole studio. And one of them came up with a brilliant idea: we need to make some stamps out of this. So that was her initiative. As in many of the initiatives here are in this studio are theirs.
Proud moment?
Very, very. I loved it. I loved it. We gave a big presentation in Volendam in January. It was cold and it was windy, but there were hundreds of people there. We launched the book on the 17th of September last year. 800 people from out the whole of the Netherlands came dressed in traditional clothing, stood in front of the Museumplein. And it was one of the happiest moments of my life, because what I'd managed to do was, I often experience that when I'm away. So if I'm in the depths of the jungle of Papua New Guinea, there are 800 people all traditionally dressed having a party. And I'm in the throes of this extraordinarily beautiful celebration. So I've always wanted to bring that here, and I manifested that.
And that also, for me, suggests that you don't have to travel far. It is around the corner, and around the corner is also on every place in the world.
I think this is a sort of a segue or a bridge or a circle back to the beginning. Therapy, what are you looking for? And I'm looking for a healthy meeting with the other to re-identify myself. So I started as a kid, happy little kid, whizzing around the world and all these wonderful places. Was sort of broken into pieces, and I've been trying to stick myself back together healthily, but by investing in the other. So the love, the compassion, the beauty, the aesthetic, I invest in other in the making of the picture. Perhaps it's a secret. Don't tell too many people. This is the way I want to feel myself. I want to be seen in the same kind of light.
And circling back to a remark you made at the beginning about success, I'm curious, what's your definition? When are you successful? What's your definition of success?
Good question. I think about that a lot. I have occasionally said, and I have to be careful how I say this, I'm one of the wealthiest people you will ever meet. I don't actually have a single penny on my personal bank account. I don't have any savings. I have boxes and boxes and boxes of pictures, if that's of any value. Every single penny that comes into this small enterprise is reinvested in my colleagues to enable me to carry on, and into the foundation that we have. I'm an extremely rich person insofar as I will be, for as long as I live, touch wood, allowed to carry on indulging in my passion. That's the aesthetic of the other, and the documentation of that with the camera. That for me is, if I'm allowed to say, successful. I found my passion, my dream very, very early on, organically, and till the day that I die, whenever that is, tomorrow in 40 years' time, this is what I'll be doing. I cannot think of a day without doing it. I'm thrilled. I have an abundance of ideas. Every single day I see, I want to record. And that is a sort of human sustainability. So that makes me extremely happy. Next to that, I believe, and I hope this doesn't sound in any way arrogant, I'm beginning to leave a bit of a legacy. I'm artistically documenting something that is disappearing, whether we like it or not. And I believe that's very, very valuable for humanity. I have made one of the last documents that exist. I returned to a number of the communities I've worked with, and in the last 10 years, they've changed. And that's terrifying, very saddening. I try and counter that with the foundation. I'm saying, okay, change and adapt and digitalize and connect with the world, but don't become homogenous. Don't abandon what made you authentic and rich. So that is what drives me today. So if that can be accounted as a success, then I'm a lucky boy. But it's one day at a time. It's not.
So success is doing what you love. Each day of your life. But I also hear a little bit of legacy. Is that a part of?
I think it's very important. I think if we are in a very complicated era in the history of humanity, is it more complicated than it ever was before? I'm not sure. It feels more complicated because we're online 24/7 and we are aware and witnessing things as they happen, and the majority of things that we share with one another are negative as opposed to positive. So it may feel like we're in a very sort of difficult transition. I think in the past, and this, I have to be careful when I'm saying this, but I'm perhaps going to say it anyway, we would lean on a sort of a religious guise to validate our existence. And then when we kind of parked that, we all went shopping every Sunday, collecting a whole load of material shit, and that was our valid. And that's also become null and void. And I think the next phase that's important is that we all as human beings find legacy. And we wake up in the morning and our reason for being here is the story that we're going to leave for others once we're passed. and caring and loving for each other in the world as it is, this tiny, tiny, tiny little speck in this massive universe. That's all that matters, and we have to care for it, and we have to care for each other. And if we find our path in that process, you can have a very, very, very short, rich life. And that could be your legacy. And whatever you're doing, so mine is aesthetically recording something I find profoundly beautiful, are the human beings that live in this world, which most of us don't get access to see. I have had through a rich privilege, and I want to share it and say, look at them, they're wonderful. Yeah.
The way you describe it like that, those pictures, are they then your pictures, or
they're
are
not
they
mine in the slightest? They belong to the world.
Exactly. That was my question.
So my wealth is doing. It's not owning. I don't own any of this.
Yeah.
This is every single penny that's left over is reinvested in how can this story be shared? How can this story enable the indigenous cultures to realize their wealth, but also enlighten and educate us? Yeah. So I don't see it as my ownership. That's a little bit counter to being an entrepreneur. So I have a few people around me that sort of manage this sort of small enterprise. They say, well, Jimmy, that's not necessarily the way the world
That's not how the world works.
That's the way my world works. And I've got into trouble in the past, big trouble, seriously big trouble, which there's no need to go into now, where I've essentially ended up on the bottom. Yeah. But then I still stick to that truth, but I have a few people around me who say, well, the gas and electricity has to be paid sometimes as well. So
the reality check is you want to be your authentic self as much as possible, which has its downside, but at least you have a couple of people around you who take care of you.
Well, I've learned the downsides, and I've learned by mistakes, massive mistakes. But in the meantime, I'm still that way.
Okay, so good question for the audience, because in this program we also talk about the bumpy road to success. Mm-hmm.
Very bumpy. Yeah.
Okay. What were the big bumps, and what did you learn from them?
I think the ultimate bump, and it's just being managed, is it sounds a little bit sort of wow. It's loving yourself. Mm-hmm. I, as a result of my experiences between the age of 7, 8, and 9, decided I wasn't worth loving. I didn't look in a mirror for about 20 years, and I loathed myself. That loathing for yourself was very damaging, not only for me, but for others. And that's what caused a lot of the failures. I began to realize as the years progressed that until I started to dare to look in a mirror, metaphorically, and decide that the first person that needs to be loved is the person that you see being me, this bumpy road would carry on. And gradually over the years, I've managed to sort of reconcile with that. I dare to occasionally look in the mirror. As a result of that, I dare to occasionally, very quietly, admit, maybe I'm okay. Yeah. And 2 years ago, I met somebody who I fell in love with, and vice versa. But that was never going to be possible until I decided I had something to give that was healthy and loving, and there was something I was allowed to receive in return. So all the bumps and the failures that I had prior to that were to do with self-loathing and lack of love for myself. I genuinely believe, having reached that place, it's not a plateau, and it's not consistent, and I know it won't last forever, but that healthy human experience of meeting, that I will be able to healthily sustain myself from now on. And providing I listen to my colleagues, I needn't return to a number of those places where I failed in the past, if that makes sense.
Yes, no, I got that.
Yeah. But it had all to do with that, had all to do with lack of love, respect, self-loathing, insecurity, massive amount of insecurity, that I'm not valid. And so it was those failures were a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now I can sit here and point a whole load of fingers at everybody whose fault it was. It was nobody's fault. It was just my journey and my inability to like myself and say that I was valid, in my opinion.
Although what you shared with us in the beginning, I mean, at that young age, when you experience something like that, it's not going to be your own fault that you.
No, but it's not going to be your own fault, but it's your own baggage, and you've got to carry it, and you've got to get your head around it. And I can't spend the rest of my life pointing a finger, shouting at everybody.
Good point.
This is what I feel. This is why I feel it. Go on a massive, complicated, and try and understand human beings, and try and have compassion for the people who hurt you. Put yourself in their shoes. I mean, that's also very much part of the DNA of who I am. Put yourself in the shoes of somebody else. If you're a priest and you've lived on your own in a building behind a wall for 40 years wearing a dress and you're told, no, 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 no. You're human. You feel things. You're fallible. We're all fallible. And then once you get your head around that and you start understanding, reading, diving deep into religions and how it's used to help and aid and sometimes destroy humanity, then you realize it's just me. It's just me, and my destiny depends on me and how I perceive myself and whether I dare or not dare look in the mirror in the morning in a loving, dignified light. And that's very much the metaphor for the pictures. Okay. Yeah.
It's just me. Triggers me the question, will there be a series of self-portraits in the future?
Good question. Maybe, but I'm not the priority. I'm not the priority. There are too many other people to be met and shared and their stories shown than me. I think along the way there's the odd picture of me, but I'm just the bridge for the story for the other.
Okay.
So I'm not the important one. Yeah.
Couple
but
of
it's an interesting question.
Jimmy, fascinating talk so far. A couple of last questions, if I may. What inspires you? What
inspires me? Children. Children prior to the age of 8, their total and utter unadulterated love for themselves, for each other and for the world and everything that's in it, and curiosity. And if we can connect with them and then bring them into a healthy way, into adulthood, and believe there's a future to live for, then I believe there's an awful lot of hope for the planet. Yeah.
Okay. And
1,001 other things as well, but we'll be here for hours if I go. Basically kids and their ability to see beauty and have optimism for everything. Yeah.
Still being naive and looking at.
Yeah, but that's what I am. I mean, that's also the I mean, this is a whole other topic. The readdressing of the balance. I'm an adult, 55-year-old adult, head to toe in scars, but I'm also a child. And I've reconnected with my childhood. I've reconnected with what I felt when I was 7, living in some of the wildest parts of the world. And I balanced the two together, this unending curiosity, this unending belief that the majority of the human beings are good and want to connect and want to be seen and want to share and want to hold my hand and take me into the world. But with an element of wisdom being the scars to know,
Okay. Do you have any favorites?
Favorites
in the photographs, like of all the thousands of pictures you've took, do a couple stick out, or are they all your babies? They're all good.
My favorite picture I made 2 days ago. I was flying back from Bhutan on a day flight, coming back up from Bangkok. Everybody was asleep or watching one of 10 different films. I looked out of the window and we were flying over the Pamir Mountains, bordering Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. Yeah. And I had a 1.5 hour, 180 degrees view of some of the most beautiful, untouched landscapes in the world. And I just looked out at it, making pictures and making films. And that's,
Why that picture?
Because that's my forthcoming project, and that's where I'm going to be working this summer. So I was flying back from Bhutan, and I looked down and said, "Wow, this is where I'm going to go. This is where."
Okay, so that's the expectation. That's the journey you described earlier.
And I don't have I am aspiring to make the most beautiful picture ever. I don't believe it's technically possible, but going on that journey to make it is unending and thrilling. I want to make that one picture which hangs, which everybody stands in front of and just bursts out into tears. And
but you have not made that yet.
And I don't think I ever will, but I'll get very, very close.
Good. 2 final questions, if I may. First of all, what do you remember from all your projects around the world? Is there anything like, is there an anecdote, is there an experience you share over and over again, like that's been so formative? Because in this interview, you've been very open about your life, about your background.
No other way to be.
Yeah.
We have no
curtains. Okay. Yeah. But is there for you like a mantra, a story which you've picked up along the way? Like this is what There
are thousands and thousands and thousands of stories. I just came back from Bhutan, where I was working for 2 weeks. I'd taken a collection of CEOs with me on a journey. They support my foundation. Yeah. We had a plan. We were going from A to B to C to D to E, and every box had to be ticked. And halfway through the plan, I went on a diversion. Mm-hmm. And I ended up talking to a group of school kids. And in amongst those school kids, there was one girl of 11 who spoke fluent English. I don't know whether you've ever been to Bhutan.
Not yet.
You could see in the eyes, light of her eyes, this girl was clued up. And I said, you've just come from school, can we come to your school tomorrow? And she said, yeah. We happen to have an English lesson tomorrow at 9 o'clock. You're more than welcome. I'll check with the headmaster. So I took these CEOs with me. We introduced ourselves to 1,000 children in the town of Bumtang in eastern Bhutan. And she stood up on the stage. And it turned out, then I persuaded these CEOs to invest in the school. It turned out that her mother was responsible for generating funds for the school that night. Her mother and all the staff of the school came to the small hotel we were staying in. And we came up with this most amazing plan to fund this school and 5 other schools in Bhutan for children to document the validity and the wealth of their culture and share it with the rest of the world. So we had a plan with these CEOs to go on this journey, but the biggest plan and the wealthiest journey that was created was serendipity, this sort of afwijking, this sort of side street. And that will enable me to go back to Bhutan again in December, because I have to sort of manifest that these kids all learn to film and document and share with the world. And these stories happen on a regular basis because I'm open, I'm looking left and right, I'm not just looking straight. And they sustain me in this unending travel, this unending journey of wealth, richness, meeting people, documentation. And it goes on and on. I mean, there are thousands of stories, but this is the most recent that happened only last week. Yeah.
Love it. Last story. This is
your story and my story.
Yeah. This is about a program about knowledge, wisdom, experience, and I was just wondering, are there any lessons, life lessons, you want to give the audience, the young people starting their career?
There are many, but we're going to narrow it down and we're going to put it into a photographic context. Mm-hmm. I have a multitude of people that come to me, and this is again a metaphor. And which camera should I buy? How many pixels should it have? And how long should its lens be? And I go, oh, no, that's not the question you should be asking me. The question you should asking me is who are you? How do you feel? How rich is your heart? And what is the journey you're on? And what is the authentic story you have that you need to share with the world to make it a better place? And then you apply the mediums that you need to share that story. And one of them could be a camera with a very long lens. So it's the other way around. So if we keep worrying about the exterior and how we tell the story as opposed to understanding what the story is and what's the story that we have to tell, that's the richest journey of all. And that's the journey that will be personable, sustainable, be sustainable forever. And if you really connect with that authenticity, then I believe that's the most valuable journey for not only for yourself, but for the world. So it's rather than looking externally, feeling it internally.
Jimmy, a great way to end a great interview.
I hope so. I was rabbiting on a bit, but it's more one out of enthusiasm than anything else.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.